793 AD. A group of Scandinavian warriors faced the uncertainties of an unknown sea in search of a prize promised by the gods. These brave Scandinavian warriors had long heard of the rich lands of the Western Islands. They decided to take their chances in search of gold and glory. Off the coast of Northumbria, they encountered the Holy Island, where the monastery of Lindisfarne was located. The poor monks had no idea of the impending danger. The Vikings invaded the monastery and massacred the helpless clerics, who witnessed an unparalleled attack on the British Isles. No one had ever dared to attack such a sacred place in that territory. The invaders plundered all that was valuable in the monastery, enslaving some of the few survivors. News of the onslaught of the monastery of Lindisfarne quickly spread across Europe, and the fear of being invaded by the northern pagans took hold of the remainder of European Christian nations. The Viking era had begun. After returning home, the Viking hosts were welcomed as true heroes. With them, they brought riches in amounts never seen before. Jewels, precious metals, spices, and slaves were among the items brought as spoils from the invasions. Those adventures proved to be highly profitable. Driven by greed and the desire to achieve the level of fame attained by the first explorers, the number of boats and warriors that left and headed for the British Isles grew massively. Every summer, the northern men landed in Christian lands. The chaos and terror brought by those men made the inhabitants of Brittany believe that the final judgment was approaching, looking at the northerners as creatures sent by the devil. And in almost all their prayers, they cried out for God to protect them from the dreadful northern men. But they did not fear the Christian God, as they worshipped their own gods. These were warrior deities who favored those who showed courage in the face of danger and did not fear death on the battlefield. The worshippers of those war gods wished nothing but to conquer their place beside Odin in the glorious Valhalla. Nevertheless, the majority of the Nordics were not Vikings, never engaging in the expeditions. They were mostly farmers, traders, or craftsmen. Despite the brutality of their warriors, the general population was peaceful and fond of the arts. The Scandinavians had a rich culture. Their abundant religion not only glorified the warrior gods, the agricultural and fertility gods were also among the most worshipped, and the pursuit of spiritual ascendancy was among the goals of those who worshipped the Nordic gods. But the prosperity of peoples like the Norwegians was limited by the geography of where they lived. Despite its beautiful scenery, Norwegian lands were not particularly suited for agriculture, either because of the soil's low productivity, the long winters, or the geographic isolation. The search for a better life prompted thousands of Scandinavians to leave their homelands, to colonize distant territories such as Iceland, Greenland, and the British Isles. The people of Brittany, after decades of invasion, became accustomed to the Viking seasonal raids. By the time summer arrived, the Anglo-Saxons prepared for the inevitable invasions, fortifying their defenses. Then, they waited for the end of the plundering to follow their lives normally. But in 865 AD, a giant Viking army appeared on the horizon, led by the offspring of the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok, who, according to legend, wanted to avenge their father's death. This army had not come only to plunder. The goal was to conquer. If a handful of Vikings could already make Christians tremble in fear, a horde brought panic to all of England. At that time, the Kingdom of England did not exist yet. The lands were split into several smaller kingdoms. Their rivalries prevented the formation of a solid coalition to try to expel the invaders. Benefiting from that fragmentation, the Vikings reached diplomatic victories. They subjugated noble Anglos without spilling any blood, as they were to pay tribute and provide soldiers to strengthen the great pagan army. With no alternative but extinction, many knelt before the Vikings. In 866 DC, the great army marched against the city of York, the most important in the north of the British island. Not even the mighty wall built by the Romans withstood the Nordic rage. Taking advantage of a Christian holiday, the Vikings surprised the city's inhabitants with an unexpected attack. After conquering York, the Vikings quickly subjugated the entire kingdom of Northumbria. After setting foot in England, the Vikings marched across the island, expanding their dominions and extorting resources from the noblemen, who preferred to pay a bribe than face them. Albeit fearsome, the army wasn't big enough to control all the conquered regions. They decided to crown native puppet kings, so that they could rule those domains, while paying a heavy tribute to the Vikings. Over the years, more and more warriors and settlers from Scandinavia arrived in England. The northern peoples took control of 2/3 of England, proving that they wanted to stay. Every sign indicated that the fall of the rest of England was a matter of time. But in the south of England, a kingdom resisted bravely against the Viking invaders. It was the Kingdom of Wessex, the richest and most powerful of all the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. With a large and organized army, it was the last defensive line of the Saxon people. Under the leadership of King Aethelred and his brother Alfred, the Saxons formed a coalition to fight the Scandinavians. Great battles ensued, and the Vikings encountered an outstanding resistance. Both sides suffered heavy casualties. The Saxons achieved some heroic victories and terrible defeats, but never softened in the face of the great Viking threat. Those battles wore both sides out. A truce was signed on condition that a tribute had to be paid to the noble Vikings. Some years of relative peace followed the truce, until a new Viking leader, known as Guthrum, motivated the Nordics to take the war back to the Wessex kingdom. With the death of King Aethelred, his brother Alfred was now the King of Wessex. With a privileged intellect, he developed his kingdom, rebuilt his army, strengthened his navy, and established the fortifications to face the war that would soon arrive. With a better trained and equipped army, Alfred guided his army to fight the pagan enemies. Carrying the symbols of Christianity, the Saxons believed that the true God was at their side, and their destiny was to push the invaders out of England. The war between the Anglo-Saxons and the Nordic invaders was inevitable. The fight for England was just beginning.